before I got out of athletics into real estate. But when I was pursuing athletics, I was wanting to coach college or professional basketball. One of the things that I did was in the summers and just in general would go around and talk to people that I admired from afar that were doing a really good job, had high character, things that mattered most to me. So I got to connect and, for whatever reason, have a lot of favor with a lot of people in the basketball community and the coaching community in general. But when I got out of it, got out of coaching and realized that I wish that I could have all the conversations that I had with all the people for my own self, just going back and listening to. And I'm a big reader, listen to a lot of podcasts. And I actually hadn't started listening to any podcasts until I got out of coaching and moved back here. But I was like, that'd be really cool to start a podcast and be able to bring on a lot of people that I got to meet, talk about a lot of the things that we talked about before, and then also bring on different people in business and different areas of just in general. And so that's initially how my podcast started. And we've been doing it for about 2.5 years now. And I think we're 145 episodes in. And so for me, it's called Building Excellence. It's all about helping people build excellence in their life, leadership, and legacy. So we bring on different athletes, coaches, business minds, and thought leaders to kind of share about their stories, some of the lessons and the principles that they've learned. And it's been a lot of fun. So that's a little background on me and the podcast that we do.
This is going to be totally show style. Neither one of us has scripted any of this. So what you're getting is raw material right here, right now. Yeah, we're recording right now, yeah. If you guys wanted to be able to share any of this content later, you certainly can. So we'll give you guys a link, or you can contact us, and we'll give you a link to be able to share with anybody else. As you know, I'm Braden Cruz. I'm the host of the Brews Business Podcast. I started Blue Studio, which is a podcast studio that you can rent and record in. Super easy, super fun. But I started that back in May of 22. Started Brews Business in August of 22. We're about 1.5 years in. I've got 2 co-hosts. One is a landscape company owner, and then the other owner, he does some vehicle wraps and custom car upgrades on like BMWs and Porsches and Mercedes and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. So he used to manage an e-commerce brand. It's a whole long backstory there, but really cool group of guys. We usually try to bring in one guest on each one of our episodes every other week, and we explore the ins and outs of what it's like to be in business, what it's like to be a business owner. And some of the stuff isn't just, you don't just listen to our podcast to come and learn about business. It's also about family and about some of the relationship stuff that it's, well, how do you balance being a business owner? How do you balance your friends and your personal life and having kids and managing vendors and like trying to pass off hats, and how many hats are you wearing now? And some of it's process. Most of the time we interview business owners. There's even a few times like where we had some doctors come in or talk psychologists or nutritionists to just kind of contribute about some well-being, overall. Brews Business Podcast is a lot of fun. To me, it's almost like therapy. And my co-host will say the same thing too. It's like we get the opportunity to sit down and listen, ask questions, and talk, and always learn something new. And it's always interesting to hear other people's perspectives and life stories and how they got to where they were and where they want to go to next. And but yeah, I think that's, long story short, a little bit about mine.
Yeah, so how and why did you start yours?
Really, because I couldn't find anywhere good to network was one. 2, I didn't have anyone to coach or consult me that I could feel like that I could trust. So I'm like, well, what if I figured? And then also, imagine how many conversations that you sit at a coffee shop at a table and you guys have a really good conversation. You're like, man, imagine if other people heard this, right? And there's a little fly on. Imagine Blake over here was a fly on the wall. He'd be like, oh man, this is a good conversation. I wish I knew about that. And good thing he's a fly on the wall. But what if you could have those meaty conversations at scale? So it's like you'd be able to, you're that fly on the wall listening to these group of men and women have these conversations about being in business and business in life and stuff too, Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the idea, was to, one, being able to network with people in an intimate setting, like this, right? Like if you and me met in the studio and we did a podcast together, I'd be able to get to know you, you'd be able to get to know me. But then the stories and conversations that we'd share, imagine these, they're not here. These are listeners. So sometimes you got to be like, and sometimes it's hard to have those conversations because you're like, oh, I got to put in this hook and I've got to be this and do that. And I'm like, with us, we're like, listen, we're going to make content and people are going to figure out what parts they like, what parts they don't like. Some of them will skip ahead or whatever. But does that make sense to answer your question? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you?
For me, it was just, I wish I could go back and listen to a lot of conversations I had, like I shared before, but I consume a lot of information, a lot of books, and so for me, it's just also a way of trying to help other people grow. Yeah. Like you said, ours is also about leadership, it's about business, it's about coaching, athletics, but more importantly to me, it's also about your faith and your family and different aspects, and everyone has a different perspective on everything. Yeah. But a lot of it's just being able to, obviously, I get a lot of benefit by just being able to sit and listen to some people that, have done a lot of great things, but at the same time, I get to share this conversation with other people on the podcast because you just never know who's listening. I mean, that's been pretty cool. It's just you just never know who's listening. So
there's so many times where I go back on other episodes and those conversations, and it's better than taking notes. Because if I wanted to meet that person again a year from now, I could just go back and watch that conversation or listen to it.
Sure.
Is there any episodes where maybe you've recently recorded? Is there anything that comes to mind? And if not, that's fine. To where you're like, oh, I remember this one episode, and this was said. Is there anything that comes to mind like that? I got one lined up.
You go ahead, and I'll think on it.
Okay, so I met with the owner of Andolini's, and one of the things that he said, out of the many great things, one of the things he said in that episode was, be a scientist and not a perfectionist, especially in business. Like, go out and make the mistakes, test and trial and error, and understand that just because you do something and it doesn't work, figure out an element why, try it again and change it, and then test and rinse and repeat. Sometimes you try something, it crashes and burns, there's no luck and no worth like trying to recover it and do that process, but most of the time it is a test, change something, repeat.
Yeah.
And have a hypothesis. And then one more thing that he said was just try to do some cool shit. He was like, just try to do something that like is really freaking cool.
Yeah.
Whatever that is. So for like one of the things they did last year was they did the world's largest pizza party at TU. 3,000 attendees. They doubled the attendees out of anyone else in the world that had a pizza party. It's like that was some really cool event they did. So I'm always trying to figure out, like, what is something cool that applies to me, that I can do? And I've yet to figure out something that big.
Yeah.
But it's coming. It's sitting here brewing.
Yeah. Yeah. One that comes to mind recently probably fits in the category is I was talking to a guy, he's an athletic director at university, and he has a head football coach that had to get fired or he had to let go. And as he was making these decisions, he talked about when he makes decisions, has to align with his heart, his head, and then his gut. And I know that's probably pretty generic, but I think if you can align and make decisions based off a framework, all right, what do you feel in your heart? Does it feel right? But at the same time, logically, I mean, there's metrics that you have to hit. So is he hitting the metrics? And then also, too, in the gut, what is your gut feeling towards something? And it's interesting, when I've interviewed a lot of different leaders, it tends to come as, whether it's common sense or what, but the gut feeling when you make decisions, typically I would say, like, I don't know a number, but 70% of the time, when you're going with your gut, that's typically a good direction to go. So I thought that was pretty interesting, but that was just one recent that I interviewed and stands out. So,
do you have any like typical questions that you ask?
I do. I always, when I'm sending something out to somebody, because mine's interview format, I'm always interviewing somebody, and I always try to send out a prep sheet, so it'll have a little info on the podcast. I'll have another sheet with questions. Some people like to feel prepared like that, and honestly, in my opinion, the best conversations are free-flowing. So we'll have questions, but we don't want to hit all of them. We'd rather just be conversational. But I'll have someone at the end that I'll always try to hit. Maybe it's like, what does building excellence mean to you?
Yeah.
Or is there a certain piece of best advice? And then if I have enough time, I'll always try to go through a little fire round to see how people think about, if I say the word resilience, what comes to your mind? What does that mean to you? Or humility? Because I always just like to see what people say right off of whatever is at the forefront of their mind. So what about yourself?
I like to ask people, do you just get started or do you prepare first? Like, I discourage people from getting into business. I'm like, please don't. It's not, just because you think it's better to not work for the man doesn't mean that you should not be working for the man, quote unquote. There's so much liability and risk and responsibility in being in business. And I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, and a lot of us are not perfect at it, and it is a hard struggle. If you're here representing a business, that's a loyalty type of position, and you're the face of that company, and you should be well respected for that position. That doesn't mean you should be the owner. You don't have to be the owner, and nor does everyone need to be. I tell everyone, I'm like, don't just get started. Like, check your insurance, check your taxes, check your competitors. Do some research, have a plan, have at least an idea of a plan in place. The plan is always going to change. What you plan on doing this year is not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same plan. It's going to adjust every 90 days. There's going to be something that's going to change a little bit, But that's one of the questions that I ask. Like, do you just get started and just do it, or do you plan and prep a little bit first?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know the setting format, but love to hear, like, any questions you guys have. How many of you have thought about doing a podcast? Yeah? How long have you guys thought about doing it? Okay.
So hence Brews and Business, like, we like to either drink beer or drink coffee on Friday afternoons, depending on how the week goes. And so, sometimes we've had some guys bring craft beers from like Marshall Brewing Company, or Dead Armadillo Brewery. We had one guy bring a bottle of Japanese whiskey once, which is cool. So we get some different experiences outside of just business. I would like to make a comment about podcasting is top of funnel. It is not a lead generating just by having a podcast at all. It will not generate leads. It is to stay top of mind, to be able to share information and highlight other people. Is that Silas? Dude, he's a podcaster. I love his videos. I watch him every now and then. Actually, now that I saw you at the coffee shop, whenever I see your videos, I watch them, and now they're on my feed all the time. Yeah, it's good. So, like, there's some benefits. So if you're going to do a podcast, there's audio and video. If you do video, you have two parts to the video. You have Reels, TikTok, Shorts, the portrait videos, and then you have your YouTube videos, which are like the landscape ones. And you can upload those to Spotify and some other platforms too. Definitely start with the audio. If you're going to do a podcast, start with the audio. That's the easiest. That's the cheapest. If you want to just get started, depends on what your expectations are. If you just want to get started, $200, buy this mic, a Blue Yeti, just go. Like, it's fine. And at the end of the day, content is content. You got to stay on a frequency. So who cares about the quality at the end of the day? You can always upgrade later on. At some point in time, you will have some people that will critique, or you'll notice that, like, views or listens can vary depending on your quality. I don't know. Arguably, for the most part, I've noticed that, like, the quality, the visual part of the quality can sacrifice so long as the auditory part is there. And even those two elements can sacrifice if the content is there and the messaging can come across easily. There's so many bad videos on social media and so many terrible podcasts that, like, just take off from, like, day one sometimes. Like, whatever that messaging is and however they hit their audience and share that message, it takes off. So, yes, you can just get started for $100, $200. Yes, you could just put in your earbuds and go. If you have a higher level expectation to really get started, you're going to spend some good money on mics, good money on cables, good money on a headphone, set of headphones. Power supply is really important too. I don't know if you know about that, but I had an audio engineer, and we figured out that, you see that plug back there? So that's to reduce frequency at hertz of 700 and something hertz. Because there was a hum just plugging this roadcaster into the wall.
Yeah.
there's little minute things like that at the end of the day, you won't really notice, and sometimes your audience won't until you come across someone that's in your industry, and then they're like, you can make this better. Sure. And just go buy this $10 little plug or whatever. But
hello, does it work?
Yeah, it works.
How do you structure your podcast? Like, do you have a yearly rotation where these are my goal guests, or how do you do it? And how often do you record? What's your goal to stay top of mind as far as exposure to new content?
I'll go.
Yeah, you can go.
Okay. Frequency for me is bi-weekly. Every 2 weeks, me and my co-host get together and we record for an hour. There was a couple episodes where we recorded for 2 or 3 hours. For the most part, these episodes can range between 10 to 15 minutes to an hour. Kind of depends on how you want to structure it. There's almost no right or wrong way of doing this. Some people have 5-minute episodes. Some people have, like Joe Rogan has 2-hour episodes sometimes 3. Like that content, you just got to keep going while you can. And sometimes that content is captured and then it's broken up into smaller pieces. So that part kind of depends. I'll let you pitch in on the rest.
Yeah, for me, I do it every week. So, and what I'll do is, since mine's guests, I'll have a sheet that I'll have people that I like to have on the podcast. And when I first started, I was going back to the question I asked some of you guys as I was thinking about it. If I could give any advice, it's just to start. There's no reason. If you really want to do it and it's something that's meaningful to you, what's the worst that could happen? And so when I look back, it took me a long time to start mine because I didn't want to put myself out there. I didn't want to have any exposure like that. That's just not really my personality. And I'm glad I did because it's been so much fun. But just like anything, when we first start something, we're not very good at it. And each time you do it, you refine it and you get better and better and better at it. So whether it's not feeling like you have the right equipment, not feeling like you can get the guests you want, I would just encourage you to start because eventually it just, like for my podcast, when I first started, it started a lot with people that I knew. Now most of my people I've never even met, and I'm doing all mine on Zoom, so I don't get the luxury of being able to sit in front of everybody. But it just has grown over time, and it's been so beneficial and so much fun. But in terms of the frequency, it's once a week. So what I'll do is, in order to make sure that I don't feel stressed because I have another job, and I will make sure that I have anywhere from 4 to 8 recordings of interviews already done. So right now I have probably 7 that are already done, and they won't come out until a month and a half, 2 months. And that gives me the ability to not have to worry about getting people on the show or being stressed. So the term batching is used. That's kind of what I do. And that helps with the frequency. It allows me to do that and not be rushing all the time. And it sounds like a lot, but when you do it that way, it makes it a lot easier, and it really helps.
I do the same thing. I've got a recording schedule and a publishing schedule, and then we're always doing this ahead. So we may have recorded something 2 weeks ago. When we're recording something tomorrow, like you're always going to have a little bit of a delay. That's important to do because you give people enough time to kind of prepare and think about and send them show notes and be like, hey, here's what we're generally going to be discussing. Is this okay? Do you have any thoughts? Yeah.
And if you're just getting started, I'm just trying to think of things for people if they wanted to start a podcast. And this is just my experience of what I did. I got a Blue Yeti. I actually got some Comica mics, which I don't even know what that brand is, but I started off doing that. And actually, I would do in-person interviews like this with the Comica mic, and I would videotape it. But during the interview process, like 20 minutes in, it was just me and the guest, and it fizzled out on me. So I actually didn't have it, but I recorded on my phone the content. So the quality of the audio is not very good, but at least I had that when I did it. But I would say too, I started with the Blue Yeti mic. I started on Zoom because I was doing things that, were doing people out of state, and some of them are out of the country. And so it allows me to have the ability to get with them. And so you have to pay a little bit extra to have that subscription to Zoom. It's like maybe $17. And then, the host that I use is Buzzsprout. And I was looking in between Buzzsprout and Lisbon is another one. And that's probably another $18 a month. So it costs a little bit of money up front. And then if you have, Blue Yeti or some type of mic, that's all you really need to get going. And if you have, a Mac, it has GarageBand and iMovie. And honestly, those are what I still use to this day. So I'm pretty cheap, but I did upgrade my mic to a SM7B, which is kind of a one that the industry standard is good. But honestly, I would say that even having that, it is awesome. But it's like a $400 mic. But I think the Blue Yeti sounds honestly just as good.
Do a cloud lifter?
I do have I've got a cloud
which
lifter.
Is another $100.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that goes
into it. And it's XLR, not USB. Yeah. So like the Blue Yeti is USB. You can just plug that. Like these have a USB-C. You can just plug them into your phone majority of the time. If not, there's adapters. You can plug them into your computer. But when you get into the XLR, like these kind of cables, these mics are dual. When you get into XLR, now you have to have a device to be able to capture the audio and convert that into another format, like USB, to be able to plug that into your computer and record. Audacity is free.
Yeah.
Audacity is is really a good auditory free editing platform.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't want to pay for the Adobe stuff. But that's what I started using. And I spent like $6,000.
Did you? Yeah.
Yeah, to get started.
Yeah.
But I did the studio stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of different.
And I started with this actual Rodecaster.
Yeah, that's nice.
And I got the Zoom ZDM1 mics, which makes a difference. So your quality of mics is a really big difference. Get dynamic. You don't need condenser. Dynamic microphones is what you want. And so I got that. I got a couple Zoom ZDM1 mics, a couple cheap headphones, and then we just started recording.
Yeah.
Just hitting record.
Yeah. No, that's great. And then you use Riverside, right?
I use Riverside now. So Riverside's pretty cool. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I don't use it, so yeah, you should definitely.
Okay. So Riverside is a fairly new company that provides us software. I think it's like $100 a year. It's pretty cheap, but allows you to be able to record with anybody anywhere on the planet. And now they have a built-in AI editor. So, for example, if you come into the Blue Studio, you can record your podcast, and in 15 minutes, I can give you your show notes, your audio, your TikToks, Reel Shorts, and your YouTube video, all in like 15 minutes. It's done. Now, is it going to be as crisp as if you hired an editor to be able to, adjust the peaks, the valleys, the amplifications? If someone spoke too soft and someone spoke too loud and they blew out the mic, like, no. But will it work? Will it be good content? Yes. Will the lighting be perfect? Like, no. When you hired an editor, they're looking for those particular things. They may adjust the contrast or the brightness or the saturation, things like that. So, but it is for the AI done and for what the software does, it's amazing. I love Riverside. If you guys need it, I have an affiliate link that I get paid on. So if you decide to sign up, let me know. Yeah, so we use Riverside. Of course, we pay $400 a month for it. Not $200 a year, because we need the professional versions to record in 4K and extra abilities and stuff. But
yeah, and so for mine isn't used as a business. I just do it for me because I love doing it. But if you're doing it for a business, it is a great way to connect with people that you probably wouldn't necessarily connect with. There's a lot of opportunity to really expand to, and you probably can touch on a little more of the business aspect, but there's lots of avenues to do it for your business that really help.
It keeps you top of mind. It allows conversations to start easier. So, for example, imagine how many real estate agents there are. Or just real estate people in general, and whatever real estate title, or landscapers, right? Like if you're trying to start conversations and to learn more in your field, or even make introductions to potential clientele, bring your current clients on, have those conversations, and now create that content, post it as often as you can. Eventually, that word's going to spread. People are going to be like, oh, hey, did you see his video? Like I just did with Silas. Like, hey, I just saw his videos, blah, blah, blah. Like now he's always top of mind. And I'm always seeing him on social media. And when I think of somebody in the space of what he does, I can make a referral. I might bring up his name when the opportunity arises, now that he's top of mind, now that I see his videos frequently, and I listen into what he does and what he says, and maybe he meets someone a mutual connection, and I'm like, oh, cool. Like, he talked to him on the podcast. I may text him and be like, hey man, like, that's a great guy. I have somebody else you might need to know. That happens all the time. You know, podcasting is a way of like being able to network and connect.
Yeah.
And it comes back around full circle, not now, but later on in some way, weird shape or form, it comes back around. To be able to meet new people, and the money follows, I would say.
You guys have any other questions?
For anybody who is considering being a guest, any tips for them with your experience having done so many interviews?
Tips for being a guest. If I'm going to be a guest on Silas' podcast or on your podcast, what would I want to know, right? Or like, how would I feel? I don't know. I'd be like, well, what are we talking about? You know, are you going to have some preset questions, or are we just kind of winging it? You know, is this going to be like a show?
Yeah.
And we're just going to have a conversation kind of like what we are now. Like, none of this is scripted.
Yeah.
You know, this is totally show style. So,
yeah.
But if I was going to be a guest on your podcast, that's what I would want to know.
Yeah, I would say as well as that, you know, it can be, I'm sure it can be nervous sometimes for some people to be on a guest on a podcast or anything in general, but just to be authentic to yourself and just to be who you are, and not try to, you know, be somebody you're not, and just be relaxed, I would say. Like, easier said than done, but I think that's pretty key, is just being who you are and not worrying about trying to be something else.
And I would say too that like there's so many podcast hosts begging for guests. It's insane. There's a company that I work with to bring people on my show. At least I have sometimes. Right now we're booked throughout April. Like, our next opening's in May in season 6. So, but this company, they are hired by podcast hosts to go out and scout for guests, and they will. That's how they stay in business. So they make their money. And then there's a Riverside Facebook group to where people are like, does anybody know where I can find guests? You know, how can I find people to record with? And you mentioned starting with people that you know, right? Start with that. Interview your competitors. Bring your competitors and be like, hey, let's talk about our industry. Don't overthink some of this stuff. Let's talk about our industry. Let's talk about how we service each other. Bring in a competitor and be like, what sucks about being in business? What's the best thing about being in business? Just come up with a few questions and then try not to like overthink it and just make it a conversation. Like, as if you literally just sat, in my perspective, if you sat down and just had a cup of coffee, what would we say? How would we talk? You know, some people are like, oh my God, I'm in front of a microphone. Oh no, There's a camera. You know, people get so whatever. And that's another reason why I started podcasts. I'll pitch in on that. But I hate being in front of the camera. I'm so used to being on the other side. Yeah. And I want to be I want to have better vocabulary. I want to be better spoken. And I want to be used to being on the other side of the camera. It's another reason why I started a podcast.
Yeah.
You touched on it with the Riverside Facebook group, but what's a good way for a business owner to try to find a podcast to get on? To just reach out to get on a show so we could explain ourselves. Majority of podcasts, just about any platform, there's usually like in our contact or about us section. If you don't see it there, Google search the podcast, usually find another website with like an email address. Sometimes they have social media accounts where you can outreach. And that's what I would say. I would say, hey, my name is Braden. I'm, with Blue Studio. We have a podcast studio. We work with a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs, professionals, authors. I'd love to contribute to your podcast, talking about some of the technical things that maybe we've been through and the struggles and the highs, like Blue Studio is a small business. Would you be interested? If so, here's my number and my information, right? That's what I would do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's good. I think also, too, just finding shows that kind of align with either your business or your values, that's going to be a key that's going to have some synergy and alignment. I think that's pretty important. So I would say that too. Yeah.
If you listen to any podcast, I would reach out to those first. You know, there's some interest there. Maybe you have a podcast, maybe there's an episode that you really connect with. Bring that topic back up to them and say, hey, I would like to contribute to this. Could I be a guest? I got questions I want to ask on your show.
Yeah.
And can you answer them live on the spot?
Yeah. And even,
You know?
even too, like figuring out ways that you can add value to the show. So it kind of goes back to that alignment with the values, but how can you serve the audience in a sense? I think that's pretty key too.
And a lot of times like that's good PR work. It's good for your business. Like they'll put you in the show notes on Amazon and Spotify and Google and Apple and SoundCloud and YouTube. You know, like when people start Google searching your business or your name and they have a link to your website and your name and stuff, and if the podcast has a lot of history, you'll show up on one of those episodes in search results. So like there's multi beneficial areas that podcasting can help. SEO is one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
What else you guys got? Bring the heat.
Any tips on trying to figure out a name? Because I've noticed a lot of podcasts have shorter names. So how do you get to that? And is there like some sort of like name generator or something, or just whatever you come up with? Because I've noticed a lot of them are like catchy and short, and you're like, oh, okay. So any tips?
Chat GPT. I love that thing, man. We have built so much on that platform. It's stupid. It's running my life right now. But that's a great. And of course, if you guys don't know it, Chat GPT, openai.com, you can go sign up and use a free account. But that's a really great idea to come up with a name some names that way. I would say have it vibe with whatever you're recording about and whoever your audience is. So like me and the guys, we like brews. We like coffee, beer, like whiskey. So that's cool. And then we like business and all aspects of business. We didn't want to just talk about money. We didn't just want to talk about marketing, you know. So we just kind of left it open. And the logo, we tried to come up with a logo to where it's like not just a standard microphone, but we're like, let's see if we can put some bubbles inside of the microphone. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say for me, when I did it, it took me a long time to actually find a name, just to decide on one. But like you're talking about, for me, like building excellence, excellence matters to me. I hope I try to be like that in my work, in my life.